Greetings sailors and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 47. I could make some kind of Star Trek reference here, but frankly I'm not that organised, and how do you tie in Star Trek to World of Warships anyway? I'd need like an Enterprise replay, and I haven't been sent one of those by any of my Patreon supporters, so we're just going to have to let it slide, unfortunately. There is, however, a relevance in the two replays I've picked out to another recent video I did on HMS Nelson, and that relevance is that this video is going to feature both the Izumo and the Dunkirk. I was kind of inspired after doing the Nelson to have a look through the Patreon warships replays, and lo and behold there were a couple to choose from each. So we're going to start off with this Izumo game from Tugboat. We're doing the high tier first, and yeah, it lets me talk about the Izumo a little bit, and then later I'll get to talk about the Dunkirk a little bit. And frankly, the Nelson of all three is the most comfortable to play, but as I said in the Nelson video, both of them have some pretty good qualities that the Nelson itself doesn't. So this is Tugboat 1964 in the Izumo with pretty good matchmaking. There's, I think, a couple of tier 9s per side, but it's mostly tier 8 and below. So it's not half bad. This is a good time potentially for the Izumo's armour, because the Izumo does have pretty tanky armour and it's also got pretty nice guns. There aren't any carriers either, which is another benefit, because in this particular game Tugboat is going to be spending a lot of time kind of idling along and basically keeping his bow pointed at the enemy, and this is one of the awkwardnesses of this all forwards turret configuration, is that you have to keep your ship pointed in a certain direction in order for you to be able to actually do anything. So no carriers is good, because carriers like to come after slow moving targets, and there have been times in the Izumo and the Dunkirk when there's been a carrier in the game, and you just, you've got yourself positioned right where you want to be, and then a carrier turns up, and either you have to start getting moving or else you'll be a bit screwed. And then in the process of trying to avoid being touched badly by a carrier, I'm trying to think of a way to put that was amusing, and now I've clearly failed, but yeah, in the process of trying to avoid the carrier dropping on you, you can end up getting yourself into an even more awkward situation. He does, for that same reason, have to be wary about destroyers, though. There's 3 per team, as you can see, and if there's Japanese destroyers especially, again, slow-moving battleships are quite an attractive target, so you have to be really quite aware of where enemy destroyers are or where they might be. For now though, he's in a relatively good position. He's not really in a particularly forward position, but he's close enough that he can try and punish these ships pushing into the B cap. There's a lot of his own team around A. 1 or 2 went south to C, but I mean, that North Carolina is probably not going to last. The New Orleans might be far back enough to actually make a getaway, but his own position, I mean, it is a little awkward. It's not bad for the time being, but even a well-angled Izumo, if they're taking a lot of fire, can get into trouble relatively quickly. But as it is, there aren't that many ships that are immediately able to fire at him. There's a couple of ships in B that we know of that have been spotted, including potentially some destroyers, so it's going to have to keep an eye on that. But there's a good chunk of the enemy team that have gone down to C, so he's not being spammed to death by HE too badly at the moment. This is relatively comfortable, all things considered. So that enemy Izumo, who of course is facing exactly the same challenges, is pretty nicely broadside, but this isn't guaranteed to do the same damage that you might get on an Iowa, RNG permitting, because it's quite a tanky ship. It has got very good armour, the Izumo. It's one of the preliminary designs for the what eventually would become the Yamato class ships, so it is very thickly armoured. Not quite as big guns though, but they're still 16-inch guns. They're still rather good guns for tier 9. I had to think about that. I don't know why I had to think about that, but I did. So yeah, damage wise this is actually going to end up I might spoil that now. This is going to end up being a not unimpressive game. In fact, probably better than any game I've had in Izumo in terms of just the sheer damage done. But the Izumo overall, despite the awkwardness of that third turret, despite the awkwardness of it overall, I feel it's still quite a strong ship. It's just not everybody quite likes that. So having said what I said earlier about torpedoes, there they are. But fortunately, because he was backing off and just trying to maintain that medium distance, they ran out of range. So that was a little bit lucky, because he didn't have a spotter up or anything like that. And if whatever destroyer that was had dropped much closer, that could have been unpleasant. It wouldn't have been fatal, but it certainly wouldn't have been nice. So the rest of his team's now pushing down to B. He's not really taken a lot of focus, I think, because his teammates have been nice and active in this one. And so far, they're not that far apart on ships, but they look like they've got the momentum going for them. So it's kind of, it's in a way, like, I don't want this to be, oh, look at this battleship that's sitting back and not doing anything. I think under the circumstances, he was not playing badly here at all. He was actually playing reasonably cautiously, and it just kind of, you know, you can't force the enemy team to shoot at you. Sometimes it just kind of works out that they don't shoot at you, which is nice for you, but maybe not so nice for your squashier teammates, because, you know, they see you well angled and they just decide to shoot other things instead. So a very, very nice hit on that North Carolina. That's just about doubles his damage, I think, and there's also a very broadside Iowa, although they are in the process of pulling a slow turn. So we'll see if this this particular salvo is okay. Now that's a little high, but never mind. He's still got a pen out of it. So he's still bow forwards. Destroys maybe still something to be wary of, but the Fletcher that's in B, well, he's got other things to worry about at the moment, so hopefully he's not dropped on Tugboat. Tugboat, at least, I mean, because he's kind of idling along at the moment, if he was worried about it, he could just pour on the speed, and that would, oh, there we go, and that would help substantially. I think this is a 0.64 game. I think that was before they lowered the Citadel of the Iowa, but I can't remember offhand. So, you know, doing what this Iowa was doing, it's not particularly advisable in any battleship, but at that place and time before the Citadel was lowered for the Iowa in Missouri, definitely not recommended. So this is just basically all of the damage for Tugboat here. He's now well over 100,000, and he's not done yet. So this enemy team, despite basically being on the defensive for most of this match, they didn't contest B in a particularly effective way. They've still done damage. They've still made Tugboat's team bleed for, you know, every inch of ocean almost, and it's not exactly been one-sided, but they do still have the upper hand here. So Tugboat himself has once more come to a halt. He's going to have to be careful of that Kagero, but as far as these two battleships go, he's pretty well angled, and if they're both firing at him, that's providing space for his own team to breathe. He's also, by the way, I think got a secondary build, or he did have a secondary build as of playing this particular match, because it was something like 11 kilometers range. And, you know, with the Izumo and the Yamato, you can go for a secondary build, but there are more effective ways to spend your captain points, generally speaking. It's not like it's a complete waste of time doing a secondary build, but it's not. I think it's not the most recommended thing to do. So the Nagato, the enemy Nagato, is actually being a bit canny there. They're varying their speed to try and make things a little bit more difficult, which can work out, but it can also work against you, because if people figure out what you're doing and adjust accordingly, you know, crawling along at lower speeds, and that can actually make you more vulnerable. But in this case, the Nagato is actually, you know, doing it fairly successfully, and his tugboat's having a hard time judging just how fast this guy's going, because he's against the border there. Well, not quite against the border, but I mean he's against a background of, you know, there's no land or islands nearby for him to particularly judge quite how fast this Nagato's going. So, having not taken a lot of damage earlier, he's starting to now, but he's still got a pair of heals left, so he's not doing too badly. And although it's probably unlikely that they would lose at this juncture, you still can't afford to be complacent under these kind of circumstances. So, of the remaining enemy ships, I mean, they're all, what is it? It's the Kagero's tier 8 and the pair of tier 7s. So, as long as nobody does anything completely stupid or there isn't like a string of detonations, they should have this more or less in the bag. So with the Kagero spotted, I think that's given Tugboat the confidence to actually start moving forwards a bit, and you can see that secondary's going off a bit, not doing anything particularly effective at this range. I don't know if he's got manual secondaries, I just know he's got the secondary range, which indicates he's at least gone part of the way into a secondary build, but it was more landing secondary hits against the battleships when they were closer, so you know, you might get the odd shot like that where a secondary hit sets a fire, but it's probably not going to dissuade the Kagero too much at that amount of health. It's not like the Kagero's a one-shot or anything. So once again, crawling forwards. They've lost a couple more teammates at this point, but the Nagato's pulling round again. There we go. If this lands true, it could be very nice. And there we go, right under the front turrets, it looked like. And that was most of that Nagato's remaining health just gone in an instant, and that has actually pushed Tugboat over 200,000 damage. This wasn't, oh, it's not actually finished yet, this hasn't been, there we go, a particularly flashy game, but it's been more one of those slow, steady, solid games where, you know, there's been some very good salvos, but some games it's very kind of spectacular and all that kind of thing, but not every good result is a spectacular result, of course. So this Kagero's a little bit close, and Tugboat at this point actually starts turning the other way, and I was thinking, okay, I mean, there's a chance the Kagero hasn't put torps out on him. The Kagero might have put torps out against, for instance, the British Grossa, but it's a bit of a risk, and as it turns out, yeah, no, the Kagero did drop torps on him, and because he's turned the other way, this could be bad. But as it is, well, he kills the Straws, and pretty much almost at the same instant, the Kagero gets killed as well. So he gets saved by the fact that the match ends. But otherwise, he would have taken a couple, maybe even enough to kill him. It's not entirely clear there, but still, that was a very good result. Over 200,000 damage done, over 2,000 base XP, only 2 kills, but yeah, it kind of initially looked like, oh, he's just going to be a battleship sitting back and letting his team take the hits. But it really wasn't that at all in the end. He did do quite a substantial amount of damage. 200,000 damage is, you know, over 200k. That's pretty good. That's really quite good. And as I said, I don't think I've ever done anything quite that close in the Izumo, so yeah, that was a pretty nice match, and yes, it was good matchmaking, but still, you know, he was shooting pretty well in that one, I think, all told. Next we come on to Darnith in the Dunker queue, and this time it's rather worse matchmaking. It's bottom tier matchmaking, and that's one of the reasons why the Dunkirk isn't that great. But I think it's still got a certain charm to it. It's one of those ships that you play when you fancy something a bit different. And although I think overall, tier for tier, the Nelson is unquestionably the stronger ship, and the Izumo is definitely a stronger ship as well, the Dunkirk can have good games. It's not one of those ships where you're just going to consistently be struggling. It can have those times when it shines, even in Tier 8 games, because for all that these are only 13-inch guns, they've still got pretty good penetration, and if you get broadside even Tier 8 battleships, you can still do reasonably substantial amounts of damage. But one of the downsides is that those guns are very woffish. It's got 1.7 Sigma, the dispersion value is not especially fantastic. So it will, you know, occasionally work, it will occasionally really work, but it will also frustrate you maybe more often than other ships would. But, you know, they're still battleship guns, a Citadel's still a Citadel, so that's not a bad start. Unlike the Izumo, you've also got all of your turrets always available, and they actually, you know, they rotate reasonably fast. They have a reasonably fast shell velocity, which is one of the perks of this ship. But unlike the Izumo, this is not a tanky ship. Oh, there we go. Goodbye, Budione. Yeah, I don't quite know what that Budione's plan was with the driving back and forth completely broadside, but it didn't really work out. So yeah, the Dunkirk is a far squashier ship, and that's because the real-life Dunkirk ships, was there just the one, or were there two of these? I feel like there were two, but I can't remember. Or am I thinking of the Richelieu class? I don't know. I don't know my French battleships very well. But, you know, these were meant to be armoured good enough against 11-inch guns. And of the ships you're going to see on a regular basis, only one of them has 11-inch guns, of the battleships you're going to see. So, yeah, this is quite a squashy ship, and this is not ideal matchmaking. So this is why I put this replay here, because it's going to be a less good result, unquestionably, but Darnith has much more of a challenge. Now, this is very bad news, the Tirpitz being this close, but for some reason they were firing HE. And it's a Tirpitz player, so of course this might be somebody that, you know, literally just started playing the game yesterday and immediately bought a Tirpitz. I don't think that's the case, but you never know with a Tirpitz. He kind of misses an opportunity there to put the shells a bit more central, or a bit more centrally into that Tirpitz, which would have netted him a good deal more damage, potentially. But he didn't quite... I guess he didn't want to turn his ship enough, and... oh, hello. Yeah, that was a bit lucky. That's kind of... like, with the Nelson, you're tanky enough to... even when you're heading away from people... goodbye, New Orleans, to be able to angle out your turrets like that. But the Dunkirk is just kind of squashy from every angle, basically. So it was more or less luck that the Tirpitz wasn't firing AP at him and then just blundered into a destroyer. So this is not bad so far. 62,000, almost 63,000 damage, and 2 destroyers deleted. And there's an Algerie. Can he repeat the performance? Will RNGs be kind to him? That looks like a decently typed grouping, and well, there's another Citadel. That wasn't quite a deletion, but yeah, it's not bad. It is one of the perks of this ship, like, for all their derpiness in terms of dispersion, when these guns hit, they don't feel bad at all. They do actually feel rather decent, but it's getting that dispersion that can be the trick. So once again on the Algerie, who's still broadside, hasn't really taken the hint that sailing broadside is a bad plan, and this time he gets rather luckier with just a single overpen. Darnith himself is taking a bit of a beating here, and he's still got another 50 seconds on his cooldown, and more torpedoes, and once again they run out of range. I'd have had a fighter plane up at this point, basically, just to give me at least a bit of early warning. Frankly, also, his angling's not that good, and goodbye, Leander. But I think he's getting a little lucky in terms of like, the things that are firing at him don't seem to be aiming particularly well. It's not like everything's firing at him either. He could certainly be in a worse position right now. In a way, this is also, you know, just like with Dunkirk, it's more of a challenge. And this replay, you know, the circumstances represent more of a challenge, but he's also had more luck than Darnith. Although Darnith had maybe a slice of luck at the end of that. No, this is Darnith. Tugboat. He's had more luck than Tugboat. Than in terms of you know, the torpedoes running out, but Tugboat had his own slice of luck at the end there. So another heal, and he's actually unspotted, which maybe means he's got concealment expert on this captain, because offhand, I can't remember what it is. It's like 15 point something kilometers. It's not a stealthy ship. That's another way that the Nelson is superior to this. That the Nelson with concealment expert is actually fairly good for a tier 7 battleship, and this is just not. It's not as bad, of course, as the Fuso, which with that massive pagoda gets seen from space, but yeah, good luck being stealthy in a Dunkirk. But it at least has a good turn of speed, and it can relocate reasonably quickly. There are times when I've had success in running away from fights just because I've got the speed to do so. At this point, though, I think he's made a bit of a mistake. Instead of grouping with his allies, he's maybe with the intent of trying to help that Scharnhorst, but the Scharnhorst has died. He's actually turned back towards the sea cap, and he's functionally alone right now because the cruisers that are going into B, they're not going to have very good lines of fire from there. In fact, some of them won't have any lines of fire at all because there's those little islands behind him that are in the way. So he's alone, and we know there are destroyers, we know there's an Algerie, so things with torpedoes. And even if there weren't things with torpedoes, you know, close range against an 8-inch gunned cruiser with AP shells, you know, making a pass, it would do bad things to this ship. So he's kind of put himself in a situation where the not great maneuverability and the lack of allies has meant that this is not looking good. This is actually looking like a probably fatal mistake, because that's not one but 2 destroyers, as it turns out, and an Algerie. And they all have torpedoes. So unless he does some extraordinary torpedo beating here, unless he gets really lucky and they all mess their drops up, he's probably a bit doomed. So there's one lot of torps incoming. The Algerie hasn't actually dropped yet. He begins his turn for the Algerie torps, takes one of those torpedoes in the tail, and then Algerie torps in the face because the guy was holding onto them for just that purpose. So it was all going so well up until that point, and this maybe once again, like the previous game, highlights some of the awkwardness of this all forward turret configuration. But in this case, it's also the fact that Darnith, you know, it was going well up till that point, and then he made a misjudgment. Maybe a well-intentioned misjudgment, but a misjudgment nonetheless. And so he's lost his ship. Oh dear, oh well. In the meantime, however, his teammates have capped B. They've got both cruisers. And it was around about this point, watching the replay originally, that once he was dead and free to just go free camming around the place, that I noticed what the tier 8 division on their team had been doing. They basically came up through A and are now going pretty much around the north edge of the map. And there's a Bayern that's with them as well. So this is a quarter of the team that have just basically, aside from going through A to start with, are now ignoring all the cap points. And it really is only the fact that there's not a lot of enemy ships left that's kind of letting them get away with it. Because overall, they're going to turn out to have been, surprise, surprise, not that effective when you look at the score screen. The weird thing is that the Bayern that's with them seemed to be the one that was actually getting the kills. And when I was watching it, I thought, okay, you know, the Bayern's got 3 kills. Maybe the Bayern will actually have a decent score. But no, the Bayern was just getting the kills. They didn't seem to have actually been doing a lot of damage. So they hounded this Amagi for a while, and despite there being 4 ships firing at him, it still took them quite a while. This is one of those games where, you know, you could tell that your team was going to win, but they took a really long time to do it, and a big part of that is the fact that these 4 ships just took this slow, torturous route around the outside. back to, towards the south to the remaining ship, which I think was a Hatsuharu, and the Atlanta decided to go for it, but for some reason the Belfast, which was the other surviving cruiser, the Cleveland having been knocked out by the Amagi before he died, the Belfast just kind of hung back in the cap circle, so it's not like the two cruisers were going in together, which would have been the smart thing to do. The Atlanta went for it, maybe didn't have radar available, but for some reason the Belfast didn't. And if they'd gone in together, this would be over already, but instead, no. What happened is that the destroyer had time to go and cap A, which was a complete giveaway to where they were, of course, and it wasn't going to be enough to turn the tide at this point because they were going to win on points anyway. But as it is, this Belfast was able to get over there, and there's more than sufficient time on the clock to make this a final kill. So this ended up being a very drawn out win, and it was kind of obvious it was going to be a win from like halfway through the game or more, but as it was, it just took them a while to seal the deal. So it looks like the Fubuki maybe went AFK at the end there, I'm not sure, but anyway. So 101k damage, like just less than half of the previous game, but under considerably less favourable circumstances. He had some fairly good luck with cruiser deletions, and despite dying like just before the halfway point of that match, I think it was at 9... Was it 9 minutes? I can't remember. Anyway, it was around halfway. It might have been actually over the halfway point. But despite having died at that stage, he was still easily top of the team. And as I said, the tier 8 division didn't do all that well, and the Bayern didn't do all that well either, considering the matchmaking. So, yes, it's a challenging ship to play. But, you know, sometimes you get results like that can make it feel worth it. It's not like... I would take this over the Hood. Like, sometimes you're going to get terrible games in the Dunkirk, but I know I keep mentioning the Hood a lot, but it's like my benchmark for boring consistency, where it just, you know, does the same thing over and over again, and you get the same amount of damage over and over again, and it's not very fun. Whereas maybe it's less consistent than Dunkirk, but sometimes you get these really good games, and other times you get less good games, and it's more satisfying to have a really good game than just hitting, you know, 80k damage over and over and over and over. But that's just me, I guess. So that's it for this supporter spotlight. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.